In this video, I'm going to talk about tritone substitutions and tritones and why you should love them as much as I do. All right, so first, let's talk about what a tritone is. A tritone is a specific interval. It's what we call, it's either a flatted fifth or a sharp fourth, depending on which way you look at it. So, for example, a C going up to an F sharp or a C and an F sharp played together form the interval of a tritone. And as we learn about in music theory, a tritone is incredibly dissonant. It's considered the most dissonant of the intervals. The D minor is the saddest of all chords. So let's talk about what a dissonant interval even means. So all intervals exist on a spectrum from consonant to dissonant. Consonant is where they just kind of are where they are. Think of, in real world, like a brick is consonant and like a bowl of Jell-O is dissonant or something so stupid. The flatted fifth, I guess, is right between a perfect fifth and a perfect fourth, called the tritone. It's considered the most dissonant of all intervals. One of the reasons that that I loved it immediately was this is a bit of music history. In the Renaissance, it couldn't have been the Renaissance. At some point, the church called it the devil's interval, and it was banned from religious music, which makes it awesome. Because it's an interval, which is banned from the church. So that's why a tritone is great, but really, really, really why it's useful for us is its role in progressive harmony. When I use the word progressive harmony, I'm talking about, anything from Western music that has chords in it, uses what we call progressive harmony. Not like prog rock, like progressive meaning that, chords lead to other chords, which lead to other chords. Without going into the circle of fifths, just trust me, this is how music works. And in jazz, to finally get to the big band part of big band lessons, in jazz, the most useful miniature, chord progression is what we call a 2-5-1. So the 2 is the minor 2 in whatever key we're in at that moment. The 5 is our dominant chord, which leads to the 1 chord. And it very much sounds like it needs to go there. And there's a reason for it. So if you look at a 5 chord, let's do my favorite thing, which is talk in the key of C. So in the key of C, our 2 is D minor 7. Our 5 is G7. And our 1 is C major of some kind. Let's call it C6-9, why not? So in the 5 chord really, really wants to go to the 1 chord. So this G7 really wants to resolve to C major. And there's a reason for that. It's not because, we're used to hearing it, although there probably is part of it is probably that. The reason is because of tritones. Within the chord of G7, there is a tritone. So it happens between the major third and the 7th. So the notes that we have in a G7 chord are G, B, D, and F. So between D and F, that is a tritone. And a tritone is incredibly unstable. Music is an exercise in tension and release. You'll hear me say this through a lot of these YouTube videos. And in this case, the tension of a tritone becomes released when it resolves. The B and the F, the tritone, it wants to collapse inward. So the B wants to go up to a C, and the F wants to go down to an E. Now notice C and E, that's the root and third of C major. So that is why G7 wants to go to C major. And that's why tritones are awesome. We'll expand on this a little bit in a moment. Let's talk about tritone substitution. Tritone substitution. What sounds more academic than that? which is honestly my least favorite thing about tritone substitution, is the name Tritone Substitution. So let me explain how a tritone substitution works. You take any 2-5-1 in jazz, and if you look at any American songbook tune, you're going to see a dozen 2-5-1s sort of through it. Probably every other bar, there's going to be a 2-5-1 in some key. So if you take the 5 in any 2-5-1, we're going to look at my favorite C major 2-5-1. What you do is you take the 5 chord and you substitute a different 5 chord that is a tritone away from the normal 5 chord. So in this case, instead of going D minor, G7, C major, we're going to go D minor, and instead of G7, we're going to go a tritone away, and it doesn't matter if you go up or down because it's the same thing. You go, instead of G7, you do D flat 7, right, to C. And therein lies the problem with tritone substitution. We've taken a very complicated sounding thing and done, we've transposed by a sharp 4th, which is a horrible transposition to think about in real time. But what we've ended up with is D minor, D flat 7, C major. So if it were up to me, instead of tritone substitution, I propose calling it a half-step slide. Like, that's so much easier, because you have D minor, we slide down a half step to D flat 7, then we slide down a half step again and get to C major. And that's what a tritone substitution is. It is a, now coined from right now, a half step slide. It works really, really well harmonically, and it's not just because we're moving by half steps, which always works. Hashtag it always works. But I don't know anything about hashtags. Hashtag 38 years old. But let's go back. Let's think in terms of tritones, like structural tritones, the cool kind. Remember when we were talking about G7 and why the B and the F want to resolve inward and get to C? Well, let's look at D flat 7. So in D flat 7, you have D flat, F, A flat, C double flat. Let's call it a B. So now you have between the 3rd and the 7th, which is our F and our B, you have a tritone. So if you resolve those inward, like we talked about, the F is going to go up to an F sharp, and the B is going to go down to an A sharp, and it's going to resolve to F sharp major or G flat major, which is where we'd expect D flat 7 to want to resolve, a 5th away. Now, let's do something crazy. We're going to take, now I mentioned before that a tritone is the same thing inverted. So in this case, an F up to a B is a tritone, but a B up to an F is also a tritone. So if we're talking about resolving by going inward by half steps, why don't we talk about resolving by going outward by half steps? That F, the F that's the 3rd of the D flat 7, we're going to move it down to an E natural. And that B, we're going to move up to a C natural. And we have a C and an E, which is the root and 3rd of C major. So that same tritone, that tritone in D flat major, or D flat 7, wants to resolve to C major just as badly as it would want to resolve to G flat major. So that is why the half step slide works. Oh my gosh, I could talk about tritones all day, but I won't. Let's talk about tritone substitutions and how they're actually used in playing jazz music. So in a big band chart, you've got to be really specific with what chords go in your rhythm section parts, and the rhythm section players have to actually play those chords. But once you get to the solo section, or if you're playing in a jazz combo and there's no orchestration anywhere, and the rhythm section can get away with adding a lot of more information to the harmony without sort of grinding against anything, because there isn't a whole ensemble playing a specific voicing. So it's common practice for rhythm section players to do their own half-step slides or tritone substitutions kind of whenever they want. And so you might have a bass player who's playing the written chord change. So they're playing a G7, but the piano player at that moment decides to, hit that D flat 7 and substitute in real time. So let's take a look at what that actually does. So you'd think on surface that those two things would grind against each other, but in fact it works pretty darn well, and that's because the tritone substitution, or half-step slide chord, works. It becomes a whole bunch of really cool extensions on the original chord. So if we have a G in the bass, but a D flat 7 going on up there, the D flat is of course the flat 5, the F is the 7th, the A flat is a flat 9, so we basically turned a G7 into a G7 flat 9 flat 5, and the B is the 3rd, right? So rhythm section players learn as they're getting stronger that they can go ahead and use these tritone substitutions whenever they want, and it just kind of adds a bunch of jazz information to the chord changes, and makes the music sound really, really hip. Of course, having the bass player hit the half-step slide, but the piano player not doing it, just does the exact same thing. You end up hearing the chord based on whatever the bass note is. So if the bass player hits a D flat, it's going to sound like a D flat something, because that's kind of the relationship of the bass to the rest of the ensemble. But then you just end up with a D flat, flat 5, flat 9, 7 chord, which works great. So hopefully this helped demystify tritone substitutions. Hopefully you love the tritone interval as much as I do now. I've got some great other lessons coming up. We're going to go back into big band next time. I've got a couple of really complicated to put together lessons, but they're going to be really, really fun. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Hit that like button. I thought I'd never say that, but apparently YouTube cares about that kind of nonsense. So hit that like button. Hit the bell icon. Definitely let me know what you thought about this in the comments. If you have any questions or any ideas for future lessons, please let me know. Until next time.